My son sent me a text that was supposed to keep me out of my grandson's graduation party, and instead it ended every financial arrangement I had ever made for his family. But Derek did not understand that when he pressed send, sitting somewhere inside the house I had helped him buy, probably at the kitchen island Vanessa insisted needed quartz and pendant lighting imported from Italy. He had just pulled the pin on something that had been resting quietly in his hand for nearly 20 years. He thought he was managing an inconvenience. He thought he was smoothing out a social problem for his wife. He thought he was writing one of those careful modern messages that dress cowardice in soft language, family boundaries, emotional space. What works best for everyone. Words designed to sound reasonable while doing something cruel. What he did not know was that I had spent 31 years as a cardiothoracic surgeon at Mercy General Hospital in Indianapolis. And if a man spends that long opening chests and touching the human heart, he eventually learns to recognize the exact difference between a temporary spasm and a fatal block. You can sue the spasm. You do not sue the blockage. You locate it, expose it, clamp what needs to be clamped, cut where you must cut, reroute the flow, and accept that tissue deprived too long of circulation may never recover. Sentimentality has its place at a bedside, perhaps, and in the soft hours after bad news has been delivered, but it has no place when the body is dying from something preventable. By the time I finished reading Derek's message the third time, I understood that what I had been calling family for years was not a family system at all. It was a circulation pattern in which everything flowed outward from me and almost nothing returned, and the text was simply the first clean image of the obstruction. My name is Robert Caldwell. I am 68 years old. My wife, Martha, has been dead 6 years, though there are mornings when I still hear her in the house before I remember that grief sometimes learns your routines so well it can imitate life. She planted the red roses along the front fence the year Derek was born. She chose them because she said every house needed one thing that bloomed like it meant it. And every May they return with a color so deep it seems almost aggressive. Red as arterial blood under surgical light. Red as the inside of a body when it has not yet decided to give up. On the Thursday evening, Derek sent the text. The roses were in full bloom, their petals heavy from a rainstorm earlier that afternoon. And I was sitting in my study reviewing investment documents at the old walnut desk Martha had bought for me after I became chief of surgery. The house was quiet in the way houses become quiet after a spouse dies. Not peaceful exactly, but organized around absence. The lamp made a warm circle on the papers. My reading glasses sat low on my nose. A glass of water stood untouched beside a legal pad, where I had been making notes about reallocating part of the Bennett Caldwell Revocable Trust into municipal bonds. I was thinking about risk tolerance and liquidity when my phone buzzed on the corner of the desk. Derek's name appeared. That alone was enough to make me stop. My son rarely texted me in long form, unless there was a problem he wanted me to solve without appearing to ask directly. Short messages meant logistics. Long messages meant I was about to be managed. I put the investment papers aside, picked up the phone and read. Hey Dad, so Vanessa and I have been talking about Kyle's graduation weekend, and we want to be upfront with you. Vanessa's parents are flying in from Phoenix, and her brother's family is coming from Seattle. We're looking at 12 people just on her side, and the house is only so big. We really want the day to feel intimate and focused on Kyle. And Vanessa feels like adding more people to the mix might make things stressful for her family since they don't really know you yet. We were thinking maybe you could come by the morning of the ceremony, watch Kyle walk, and then head out before the dinner. We'll FaceTime you from the party so you can see Kyle open his gifts. I know it's not ideal, but it's what works best for the whole family right now. Hope you understand. Love you. I read it once with the ordinary disbelief that comes when the mind reaches for an innocent explanation before the truth has fully entered the room. I read it a second time slower, not because the meaning was unclear, but because the cruelty was so smoothly wrapped that my brain kept looking for the seam. I read it a third time as a physician reads a scan, no longer looking for comfort, only for evidence. Vanessa's parents were flying in from Phoenix. Vanessa's brother's family was coming from Seattle. 12 people on her side. The house was only so big. The house, Birchwood Drive, a 4-bedroom property in a neighborhood Derek could not have entered without my money, renovated with funds from my trust, maintained through a stream of quiet payments I had made so consistently that apparently they had become invisible. They had room for Vanessa's people, People who had never written a check for that mortgage, never paid Kyle's tuition, never covered the emergency furnace replacement, never paid for the kitchen renovation, never sat with Derek in a hospital waiting room when Martha was dying and watched him stare at the floor because he had no idea how to be useful. But I, Kyle's grandfather, the man who had paid $82,000 for his Purdue engineering education, 3 years of rent, books, food stipends, and the laptop he used to finish his senior design project, had been assigned a morning cameo and a video call. I was welcome to watch him walk, then leave before dinner, like a consultant whose bill had already been paid. I set the phone down on the desk with care, not because I was calm, because I was not. The old photograph of Kyle sat on the shelf above my computer, the one from the lake house when he was 11, gap-toothed and triumphant, holding a fish so small he had insisted it was enormous. Martha had taken that photograph. I remember her laughing as Kyle tried to angle the fish closer to the camera to make it appear larger. And I remember Derek standing beside the dock, distracted, already checking emails from a job he would later quit because Vanessa said the hours made their life feel small. That was how it had been for years. Derek drifting, Vanessa redirecting, me stabilizing, Kyle growing up quietly in the middle of adults who treated my generosity like weather. Something natural, expected, occasionally inconvenient, never deserving acknowledgement unless it stopped. I looked at Kyle's face in the photograph and felt the first wave of something I did not yet want to call grief. Not grief for Kyle. He was still reachable, still clean, still becoming himself. This grief belonged to my son, or perhaps to the idea of him I had kept alive longer than he deserved. I did not act immediately. Precision matters. In an operating room, panic is contamination. You may feel fear, but your hands cannot show it. I sat with the feeling for exactly 14 minutes. I know because I looked at the clock when I set the phone down, then again when I picked it up. During those 14 minutes, I felt anger rise, hot and humiliating, then recede into something colder. I felt the impulse to call Derek, to ask him if he understood what he had written, to say his mother would have been ashamed, to demand that Vanessa come to the phone so I could hear her explain how her family had become central and I had become logistical. But calling would have given them the chance to manage me, to soften the wording, to say I had misunderstood, to tell me the party was complicated. The seating was tight. Vanessa was overwhelmed. Kyle would be disappointed if things became tense. They would make my exclusion feel like something I had caused by noticing it. No, I had spent decades letting them revise reality after the fact. That evening, I decided I would not invite their revision. The first call was to First Midwest Bank. Patricia Allen handled my trust transfers and had done so for more than 20 years. She answered in the professional voice of a woman who understood that wealthy clients do not call after business hours, unless they mean to change something consequential. Dr. Caldwell, she said, is everything all right? I told her I needed to cancel all automatic transfers associated with the Kyle Caldwell supplemental account, effective immediately. Tuition reimbursement, rent subsidy, monthly living stipend, incidental support. All of it. She paused. It was a small pause, but in finance, as in medicine, pauses have meaning. She had processed those transfers for 4 years. She knew their size. She knew their regularity. She knew family money when she saw it, though she had the discretion never to name it. Of course, Dr. Caldwell, she said, would you like the standing balance transferred back into the primary trust account? Yes, Patricia, immediately. Is everything all right? Everything is being corrected, I said. Thank you. The second call was to Frank Morty, the contractor working on Birchwood Drive. Frank had done renovations for me before, and he respected invoices, schedules, and whoever signed the checks, which made him a man of uncommon clarity. Derek and Vanessa were 6 weeks into another renovation. This one a mudroom expansion and master bathroom reconstruction that Vanessa had described as necessary for resale value, even though they had no intention of selling. Italian tile, a freestanding soaking tub, heated floors, a steam shower with programmable settings, a custom walnut vanity that made the estimate swell like a hemorrhage. I had agreed to fund it as a 5th anniversary gift, because I had mistaken financing their comfort for participating in their lives. Frank answered with saw noise in the background. Doc, he said, what's up? I told him to stop work at Birchwood immediately. He thought he had misheard me. He explained that the subfloor was open, the plumbing rough and incomplete, the old shower already demolished, the mudroom framed but unfinished. If they stopped now, the house would be half wounded. I told him I understood. Cover everything with plastic. Lock your equipment. Send me the invoice for labor and materials to date. I will pay in full, but you and your crew are not to continue. Frank went quiet long enough that I imagined him standing in the skeletal bathroom, looking at exposed studs and open piping. You are the one cutting the checks, Doc, he said finally. We will wrap the site and pull out tonight. After that, I stood at the study window and looked at Martha's roses. For a few minutes, I did what people do when they are about to make decisions that will be called cruel by those who depended on their refusal to make them. I argued against myself. Martha would have told me to breathe. She would have said, Robert, not everything is surgery. She would have reminded me that Derek was our only child, that grief had already taken enough from this family, that Kyle's weekend should not become a battlefield. She would have said these things because she was good, and because goodness sometimes imagines that if you keep offering warmth, cold people will eventually learn the shape of it. But Martha was gone. I was alone in the house where her kindness still lived in objects, in the rose bushes, in the quilt folded at the end of the guest bed, in the old recipe cards in the kitchen drawer. And our son had found a way to turn even Kyle's graduation into a seating problem I was expected to solve by disappearing. I did not text Derek back. I did not call. I did not warn him. You do not announce an incision before the anesthetic takes hold. You prepare, then you act. The next morning I drove to Catherine Park's office downtown. Catherine had handled my affairs since Martha's illness, and if I trusted anyone with legal anatomy, it was her. She was 45, precise, and constitutionally allergic to losing. Her office had no sentimental clutter, only clean lines, legal texts, a small, thriving succulent in a terracotta pot, and a view of the street below where people crossed intersections without knowing how much of their lives could be altered by one signed document. She listened while I told her everything. Derek's text, the house, the transfers, the renovations. Kyle, Vanessa, the APS risk I had not yet named, but already anticipated, because in families that learn to live on someone else's resources, the first defense against losing access is often to question the resource holder's competence. Catherine did not interrupt. When I finished, she folded her hands on the desk and asked me to walk her through Birchwood Drive. I told her the deed was held in the Bennett Caldwell Revocable Trust, that I had provided a documented gift for the down payment of $110,000. But the major renovation expenses totaling approximately $93,000 over 4 years had been paid directly from the trust to contractors. Derek and Vanessa had no lease, no rent history, no ownership interest. They lived there because I had allowed them to live there. Catherine nodded slowly, the way a surgeon might after seeing that the imaging matched the symptom. What do you want to happen, Robert? I want the property listed for sale. I want formal notice served terminating their occupancy. I want the estate documents revised. She studied me for a moment, not with doubt, but with the care of someone assessing whether a decision came from clarity or injury. Removing a child as beneficiary is significant. I said I was not removing Derek from existence. I was removing him from the position of primary beneficiary over assets he had treated as his by right, while treating me as conditional. Kyle, she asked. Kyle remains protected, I said. His trust stays intact, but I want it modified so it pays directly to him at 25, independent of anything Derek controls or can access. His graduation gift is already arranged through a separate account Derek cannot see. I want it to stay that way. Catherine wrote quickly. She prepared the notice while I sat across from her and watched the light move across the shelf. The succulent on her credenza was healthy because someone had watered it correctly. That thought irritated me with its simplicity. Caring is not giving everything. Too much water rots the roots. I had overwatered my son for decades, and then wondered why he had never learned drought. I signed the documents: notice to vacate, trust amendment, beneficiary restructuring, authorization to list the property. Catherine told me a process server would go out the following morning. I asked how quickly we could list. She said the market in that neighborhood was strong. Offers within 2 weeks likely. I nodded. There was no satisfaction in it. Not yet, only the dull efficiency of a necessary intervention. I did not attend Kyle's graduation ceremony. Derek had offered me that much, the right to sit somewhere in the crowd and watch my grandson walk across a stage, then leave before the dinner where the real family would gather around the kitchen I had paid for. I declined without telling anyone. Instead, I drove to Harlow's, A dark wood restaurant near Mercy General where I had eaten after difficult surgeries when going home too soon would have meant bringing the dead with me into the house. A jazz pianist played near the bar. I ordered Barolo and pasta and sat alone at a corner table while other families came and went around me. I thought about Kyle in his cap and gown. I imagined his face scanning the crowd and not seeing me. That hurt. It hurt enough that for a moment I almost called him, almost got in the car, almost accepted the small role Derek had assigned me because love makes cowards of many men. But then I imagined standing outside Birchwood later while Vanessa's family laughed inside. Imagine the FaceTime call where I watched Kyle open a gift I had funded from a phone screen because there had not been room for me at a table built inside a home I stabilized. And the moment passed. I stayed at Harlow's. I ordered a second glass of wine. At 4:03 Derek called. At 4:09 Vanessa called. At 4:14 Derek called again. I let them go to voicemail. At 5:17 Kyle called and I answered. "Grandpa," he said, and his voice was low, careful. He was somewhere quieter than the party, perhaps the back porch, perhaps the hallway near the laundry room. "Are you okay?" I told him I was fine and congratulated him. I said I was extraordinarily proud of him. He thanked me, but the silence afterward told me he had not called only for that. "Mom is saying you are selling the house," he said. "The trust is listing the property, yes. Is this because of what Dad texted you about the party?" "It is related to a number of decisions I have made about how my assets are managed going forward." Kyle was quiet. I could hear muffled laughter in the background, a party happening around him, a party from which I had been edited. "I am sorry," he said finally, "about what they said, about the party thing. It was not right. You have nothing to apologize for," I told him. "This is between your father and me. Your future is not affected. I need you to hear that clearly. Your trust, your graduation fund, everything I set aside for you, none of that changes." He exhaled softly. I did not know about the text until after he said, "I know. I wanted you there," he said. And that sentence struck harder than anything Derek had sent. For a moment, I could not answer. Then I told him to go back to his party. "You earned this day, Kyle." He said goodbye, and I sat with the phone on the table until the screen went dark. The process server reached Birchwood Drive the following morning at 8:45. Just as Frank Morty's crew was loading equipment into their trucks. Frank texted me a photograph of the driveway, plastic sheeting visible through the open garage, with the message all clear, Doc. 15 minutes later, Derek called in a state beyond anger. His breathing came hard through the phone. "What is this paper?" he said. "What is this paper?" Some guy just handed Vanessa at the front door. "Notice to vacate." "Robert, what is going on?" "Robert, not Dad." The word was not accidental. People reveal themselves in what they withdraw first. I told him the notice explained the situation clearly. He had 30 days to find alternate housing. The property was being listed. He said I could not do that because they lived there. It was their home. I told him the property was owned by the trust, that he had never paid rent or held a lease, that legally he and Vanessa were tenants at will at best and guests in the ordinary moral sense. I was revoking the invitation. He made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a choke. "Because of a party," he said. "You are doing this because of a text about a graduation party." I told him the text was merely the most recent and specific expression of a pattern I had refused to address. I reminded him that Vanessa's family had 12 seats, and I had a schedule. I reminded him that Kyle's education, the house, the kitchen, the renovations, the furnace, and 100 quiet rescues had come from me. He said they were going to pay me back. "Derek," I said, "you were never going to pay me back. We both know that." The fiction that these arrangements were temporary was something we maintained because it preserved your pride and allowed me to pretend my generosity was love returned. But fiction is not a foundation. There was silence. 30 days, I said. Use them wisely. Apartments are competitive in your area. For 10 days, the escalation followed a predictable course. Vanessa called twice. I did not answer. Derek sent long messages, full of wounded phrasing and selective memory. He said I had humiliated them in front of Kyle. He said Vanessa had cried all night. He said her parents thought I was unstable. He said Martha would never have done this. That one I read twice and then deleted. Martha had not raised Derek to use her name as a crowbar. My sister-in-law, Barbara, left a voicemail asking me to reconsider because she had heard I was acting erratically. Her voice carried concern, but also the cautious distance of someone who had been given only one side and did not want to be pulled into the undertow. I did not call her back immediately. Instead, I forwarded every message to Catherine. On day 11, A lawyer named Gerald Sims called to say he represented Derek and Vanessa. He used words like promissory estoppel and detrimental reliance with the confidence of a man who had learned them recently and intended to make them pay rent. He claimed Derek had relied on my promise that Birchwood would one day be his. I asked him what written promise he had. He mentioned an email. I said my attorney would respond in writing. Catherine laughed when I told her, not loudly, just enough. They have nothing, she said. If they push, we counterclaim unjust enrichment, nearly $250,000 in benefits. No legal entitlement, no repayment history. Sometimes the best defense is a ledger. Then Vanessa made the move I had expected and dreaded. Adult Protective Services called on a Tuesday morning. The investigator, Harold Briggs, was polite and neutral. A report had been filed expressing concern about my well-being. Allegations included impulsive financial decisions, paranoia toward family members, confusion about legal arrangements, and possible cognitive decline. Vanessa had found the oldest weapon used against aging people who refused to stay useful. She had not called me father. She had not called me family. She had called the state and attempted to make me medically questionable. That angered me more than the graduation text. To be excluded is cruel. To be pathologized for resisting exclusion is predatory. I invited Mr. Briggs to my home. Then I prepared. By the time he arrived, my kitchen table held a folder arranged with surgical neatness. My cognitive evaluation from 6 months earlier through a university hospital research study. 48 out of 50. Excellent by any standard. A letter from my internist confirming full capacity and excellent health. Financial records annotated in my own handwriting. Trust documents, a timeline of transactions. Derek's text printed and dated. Mr. Briggs was a quiet man in his 50s. With the tired eyes of someone who had seen too many families discover paperwork as a weapon. He reviewed everything slowly. I made coffee. He asked plainly why I had stopped funding my son's household and initiated eviction. I told him that Derek had excluded me from my grandson's graduation dinner while accepting my money to fund the house where that dinner was held, and that I had made a rational decision to stop financing an arrangement that treated me as optional. Mr. Briggs looked at the cognitive score again. That sounds, he said carefully, like a rational response to a relational grievance. I told him rational responses to complex problems had been my specialty for 31 years. He almost smiled. At the door, he said he could not speak to specifics, but false or misleading APS reports had consequences. After he left, I stood in the kitchen for a long time. Vanessa had tried to turn age into evidence. That clarified her more than any shouting could have. Catherine was ready before I called. They are building toward guardianship, she said. If they can frame you as incompetent, they can ask to freeze assets and delay eviction. Weak petition, but delay may be the goal. We file first, establish competence, establish trust authority, attach APS outcome, medical records, financial history, and Derek's dependency. We define the narrative before Gerald Sims performs in front of a judge. The hearing was set 3 weeks later before Judge Patricia Wynn, a former corporate litigator known for her impatience with forensic theater. I arrived early in my 12-year-old Volvo, wearing a navy suit and the tie Martha gave me on our 30th anniversary. Derek and Vanessa arrived separately from Gerald Sims, which told me enough about the atmosphere at Birchwood. Vanessa wore a gray blazer and controlled expression, but her jaw was tight. Derek looked thinner. Gerald Sims carried a thin folder and the cheerful confidence of a man approaching a machine, without understanding where the blades were. His argument was theatrical in a restrained way. He claimed Derek had been led to believe Birchwood was his permanent family home. He claimed my sudden financial withdrawal showed psychological distress. He used the phrase cognitive vulnerability 3 times. He did not say senile, because even he knew enough not to step directly into that hole. Judge Wynn listened with the stillness of a person already sorting what mattered from what did not. When he finished, she asked whether he was requesting guardianship for a retired physician with a spotless cognitive evaluation, because the man had stopped paying his adult son's bill. Sims tried to redirect. She asked for written evidence that I promised Derek the property. Sims produced an email from 18 months earlier, in which I had written that I wanted Derek, Vanessa, and Kyle to have a stable and lasting home. Catherine stood and submitted the complete email chain. In the next paragraph, I had written that the property remained in the trust during my lifetime and decisions about its future would be made by me as trustee according to my estate plan. The courtroom silence was immediate and unpleasant. Judge Wynn looked over her glasses at Sims and asked whether he had reviewed the complete chain. He said he had received the document in partial form from his clients. Judge Wynn set the paper down as if it smelled bad. Then she turned to Derek. "Mr. Caldwell, do you have any evidence, other than your father's recent financial decisions, that he is cognitively impaired?" Derek shifted. He looked at Vanessa, then at Sims. "He has been acting differently," he said. "Has he been confused about where he is? Unable to manage daily affairs, violent, delusional?" "No," Derek said. "He is angry." Judge Wynn repeated the word, angry. The courtroom held it. Then she dismissed the petition with prejudice. She noted the APS report followed by the guardianship petition appeared to be a coordinated strategy to delay eviction and freeze a competent adult's assets. She looked directly at Vanessa and advised her to consult counsel about the implications of filing unsupported reports with Adult Protective Services. Vanessa sat so still, she seemed afraid any movement would fracture her. The eviction could proceed. The emergency motion was denied. Court adjourned. No one spoke to me afterward. Derek left with his eyes down. Vanessa left like a person trying to preserve dignity that had already been removed from the room. Gerald Sims avoided eye contact. People assume that vindication feels clean. It does not. It feels like standing in an operating room after the bleeding has stopped and seeing how much blood is on the floor. Catherine touched my arm and said that part was done. I nodded. That part was done, not the rest. Outside the courthouse, sunlight fell in long rectangles across the marble floor, and I thought about Derek at 8 years old taking apart an alarm clock at the kitchen table to see how it worked. I thought about him at 19 calling from his dorm at midnight because he was homesick and too proud to name it. I thought about him at Martha's funeral, standing beside me at the grave, looking like the world had tilted beneath him. He was my son. I was not finished with him, but I was finished with what we had been. There is one piece of this I had not told anyone in the family. In the last year of Martha's life, we established a private scholarship fund through the University Hospital's foundation, the Margaret Caldwell Memorial Engineering Award, though Margaret was the name she rarely used, preferring Martha because she said Margaret sounded like someone who owned too many pearls. She wanted the fund to be quiet. She wanted it to last 2 full engineering scholarships per year, indefinitely. I had intended to tell Kyle when he was old enough to understand that legacy is not the same as inheritance. The week after court, I invited him to Indianapolis for lunch. He came in khakis and a button-down, looking so much like Martha around the eyes that I had to turn away before opening the door fully. We ate at Harlow's. Afterward, I took him to the foundation office. In a small conference room, the director laid out the scholarship documents. Kyle read slowly. When he reached the name, he stopped. "Grandpa," he said. "She wanted it quiet," I told him. "She wanted it to last." He stared at the certificate a long time. He did not cry, but his throat worked. Then I gave him the folder for his own trust, modified so Derek could not touch it, structured to distribute at 25. Enough to give him a foundation, but not enough to remove the need to build. "This was always yours," I said. "It has nothing to do with your father." Kyle folded the folder carefully and said, "I know. You are not that kind of person." That sentence stayed with me longer than I expected. Birchwood sold in 9 days after listing. The buyers were a young couple with a toddler, both overwhelmed and grateful in the way people are when they have been waiting for a door to open, and it finally does. Derek and Vanessa moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Carmel near the highway. Kyle told me that, not because I asked, but because sons and grandsons sometimes carry information between wounded branches of a family tree, whether they mean to or not. Vanessa's APS filing became an investigation of its own. I did not follow the details closely. Catherine told me enough. The report had been documented as unsupported and potentially retaliatory. Whether consequences came formally or merely reputationally, I do not know. I had stopped needing every incision to be visible. September came before Derek called. Not with legal language, not through Sims, just my son on a Tuesday evening, silent for so long after I answered that I thought the line had dropped. "I don't know how to do this," he said finally. "I know," I told him. "I am not calling to ask you for anything." "I know that too." Another silence. "Mom would be disappointed in me," he said. I closed my eyes. Yes, I said she would. She would also be here every day trying to fix it, which is a different conversation. He exhaled like something had gone out of him. "I am sorry about the party, Dad. About the text. It was Vanessa's idea and I let it happen, and I should not have. In surgery, there are moments when the heart begins again. Not strongly, not safely yet, but with enough rhythm that everyone in the room understands the situation has changed. You do not celebrate. You continue. Thank you for saying that, I told him. We talked for an hour about Kyle, about his new job in Columbus, about a restaurant Derek had found near the apartment that did a decent osso buco, about nothing and everything except money. Before he hung up, he asked if he could visit sometime. I said October. Martha's roses would have their last bloom. He came alone. He and Vanessa were, as he put it, in a difficult period. We walked the garden in late afternoon light. The roses were deep red, their final color before winter. Derek stopped in front of them and said she really loved these. She planted them the year you were born, I said. He looked at me, surprised by a fact he should have known. I know, I said before he could speak. I should have told you more. We stood there, two men with too much history and too little language, separated by the long account of what had been given, taken, assumed, withheld, and finally named. I have been a surgeon for 31 years. I know the heart can restart. I have felt it happen beneath my hands. But I also know that restarting is not healing. A heart can beat again and still carry damage in the muscle. Tissue can survive and remain scarred. Blood can flow through a rerouted vessel, but it does not mean the original path returns. That is where we are now. Derek is still my son. Kyle is still my grandson. Vanessa is still the woman who tried to turn my age into incompetence because my money stopped flowing. Martha is still dead. The roses still bloom. The trust is changed. Birchwood is gone. The old arrangement is gone. What remains is not justice in the clean, dramatic sense people like to imagine. It is quieter and heavier. It is a father and son standing in a garden where a dead woman's roses refuse to stop blooming. Both of us understanding that something did survive, but not unchanged. Never unchained. I do not deal in certainty anymore. I deal in precision, patience, and the knowledge that sometimes the most loving thing left to do is cut off the circulation to what has been feeding on you. Then wait and see whether anything worth saving can learn to beat on its own.